Hey, Shalom, double honesty apostles, a great millstone. Honesty brothers will be pushing this truth and sincerity throughout the four corners of the earth. And all praise unto Yahweh Shemi Shai. So today I'm gonna go into this article here dealing with the shift towards or rather more the shift away from the dollar. And today's big news is this new thing of the petro-yuan that they're trying to introduce. So I'll start with this article here uh, um, titled "The Shift from the U.S. Dollar as the World Reserve Currency," and it says it's underway. All right, so it says today more than 60% of all currency reserve. Today, more than 60% of all currency in the world is the U.S. Dollar. Right. So we go and do some history. Okay, and we go into this article here, how the U.S. dollar became the world reserve currency. Okay, it says the birth of the U.S. dollar. It's the Federal Reserve created by the Reserve Act 1913 is responsible for the is in response to the unreliability and instability of currency system based on banknotes issued in by individual banks. Because you would have had at that time every bank had their own notes. Okay, at that time I believe that's how the history is. It says at that time the U.S. economy had overtaken Britain's economy as the world's largest economy, because also too, if you go to the scripture talks about how America was birthed through Britain, and even the mother of America was going to hate America. Okay, so we're getting into that time now. So you're seeing a shift towards the east. Ultimately, that's going to result in an aggressive America, aggressive United States, an aggressive war, and they're going to go out, to all-out war to be the dominant ones upon the face of the earth. And in so doing, even the ones that was along with the agenda, along with the so-called New Order agenda, they're gonna come up against America at some point. Okay, so that's written about within the scriptures. All right, so it says also at that time most of the developed countries pegged their currencies to gold. All right, to create stability in exchanges, in currency exchanges. So you would have had what was known as gold-backed currencies. However, when the World War One broke out in 1914, many countries abandoned their gold standard to be able to pay their military expenses with paper money, which devalued their currency. So, that thing where they say all wars are bankers' wars. Well, hey, that plays into that as well, because shifting away from the gold-backed currencies that they would have had in World War One, all right, and prior to that. All right, you would have had stable economies. Okay, people would have been independent, but shifting towards currencies and basically what's known as fiat currencies, you would have had it to where people are more dependent on somebody else to do, to run the numbers for them. Okay, people would have got into a hell of a lot of debt because, well, it's backed by nothing, so you just borrow. It's valued over time. Okay, so it says the dollar's ascendancy to the throne. 3 years, 3 years into the war, Britain, which had steadfastly held the gold standard to maintain its position as the world-leading currency, found itself having to borrow money for the first time. So here we go, just like I mentioned before. Okay, it says the United States became the lender of choice for many countries, and they were willing to buy dollar-dominated bonds. Okay, so you would buy these bonds and that. Which you would, eventually, pay off a certain amount of time. Okay, it says in 1919, Britain was finally forced to abandon the gold standard, which decimated the bank accounts of international merchants who traded in pounds. By then, the dollar had replaced the pound as the world's leading reserve. Okay, and as it did in World War One, the United States entered World War Two well after fighting had started, and before it entered the war, the United States served as the Allies, right, main proprietor of weapons supply and other goods, collecting much of its payments in gold. And by the end of the World War, the United States owned the vast majority of the world's gold. Okay, this precluded a return to the gold standard by all the countries that had depleted their gold reserves. In 1944, delegates from the 44 Allied countries in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to come with a new system to manage foreign exchange that will not put any countries at a disadvantage. It was decided that the world reserve currencies wouldn't be linked to gold, but could be linked to the US dollar, right? Which was linked to gold. Okay, the arrangement, which became known as the Bretton Woods Agreement, established the central banks uh, uh, would maintain fixed exchange rates between their currencies and the dollar. Okay, so in order to pay for certain world, country to country exchanges, this would now be done in dollars. Okay, as opposed to gold. Okay, so instead, in turn, the United States would redeem US dollars for gold on demand. And but then that all goes into the whole thing of no gold at Fort Knox, etc., etc., etc. I say it says countries had some degree over the currencies in the situations where their currency value became weak or too strong relative to the dollar. They could buy or sell their currencies to regulate their money supply. All right, and I would really have to go into the economics, and maybe I'll do this video on its own, going into these different things there, because really it's I'm trying to go through it quickly in order to do that. So we know after that, it transpired that I think they might even mention it here. Okay, I'm just trying to read it real quick. Okay, so let's go into this here. So it says demands for Treasury securities coupled with the deficit spending needed to finance the Vietnam War and the Great Society domestic programs caused the United States to flood the market with paper money. With growing concerns about the stability of the dollar, the countries began to convert dollar reserves into gold. And if you go study the history of the gold, because this is when you had gold-backed dollars here. Okay, but pretty much what happened was they was printing more than they had in terms of gold, and people didn't like that. It says the demand for gold was such that President Nixon was forced to intervene and delink the dollar from gold, which led to the floating exchange rates that exist today. Okay, this period of stagflating, high inflation and deflation, the US dollar remains the world reserve currency largely based on the size, the strength of the US economy and the dominance of the US financial markets. Now, what I really was hoping that it was going to go into is that it was going to go into the fact that you have now you have this dollar basically based on oil, pretty much, because oil barrels for a long period of time was priced in dollars, and that gave this global fiat currency, this global world reserve currency, stability. Okay, but now you're seeing that stability being okay. So let's go into this now. It says China's launch of petro-yuan in 2 months sounds death knell to dollar's dominance. Okay, so now you have a new alternative means of purchasing oil. Okay, and like I just mentioned, this dollar that you have out here now is not based off of it's not based off of gold anymore. It's based off of oil. And once you have that oil getting sold in other currencies, then, well, that currency, that being yuan, is going to be the one of choice to other countries, but that dollar is going to lose its dominance within the market. It says one of the world's top energy importers, right? China is set to roll out a yuan-dominated oil contract as early as this year. Analysts call the plan announced by Beijing in September a huge move against the dollar's global dominance. The so-called petro-yuan is a wake-up call for investors who haven't paid attention to China's plans. According to the head of Critical Assets Management Asia, Adam Levinson, has quoted by Bloomberg. Okay, so petrodollar and looming as China and allies dump it in oil trading. Okay, so like I gone into these, you should pretty much get the gist of that. See if I can read this. It says, according to Levinson, Chinese companies might grow into anchor investors in Saudi Arabia's initial public offering of national oil giant Saudi Aramco, and it's befitting because not too long ago you also had the thing of Saudi Arabia making deals with Russia. So you're seeing this whole shift towards uh, 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 um towards against the dollar and towards the east. Okay, so pretty much hopefully that was of edification. Lord's will, I'll come back with another one another time. There I'm gonna say all praise unto Yahweh Shemi. I'll shine double honestly, apostles, a great millstone. All your brothers that be pushing this truth in sincerity. Shalom.